In November 2023, the board of one of the most consequential companies in the history of technology made a decision that shocked the world. They fired Sam Altman, the man who had built OpenAI from a scrappy nonprofit research lab into a name spoken in boardrooms and government hearings on every continent. The man who had personally shepherded the launch of ChatGPT, which became the fastest growing consumer application ever recorded, reaching 100 million users in 2 months, a milestone that took Instagram 2.5 years. The man who had secured a $13 billion commitment from Microsoft and turned artificial general intelligence from a theoretical concern into a dinner table conversation. By any conventional measure, Sam Altman had done the impossible. He had made the apocalypse investable. But the board was not wrong, not reckless, not confused, not, as the subsequent media narrative insisted, a group of naive idealists who panicked and destroyed value for no reason. The real question was never whether the board made a mistake. The real question is what they saw that the rest of the world refused to look at. Hit subscribe, someone has to stay informed. OpenAI's valuation in early 2024 settled around $157 billion following Altman's reinstatement. By late 2024, a new funding round valued the company at $157 billion, and then again at $300 billion depending on which secondary market transaction you reference. Analysts called it a triumph. The market agreed. The narrative had been ratified by capital. Not exactly. The problem is buried in how that number was constructed. OpenAI is not a public company. Its valuation is not determined by a liquid market pricing millions of daily transactions. It is determined by the terms of a single funding round negotiated between a small number of counterparties with aligned incentives to produce a high number. Imagine you and 3 friends agree that your apartment is worth $40 million. None of you sell it, no one tests it against the open market, but you write down $40 million and the press reports it as a valuation. That is not a market clearing price, that is a number selected in a room. This structure has a documented precedent. WeWork in 2019. At peak, SoftBank's private funding rounds valued WeWork at $47 billion. The mechanism was identical. Concentrated investor rounds, no public market test, a charismatic founder whose personal narrative was inseparable from the company's value proposition. When WeWork attempted its IPO and submitted its S1 to public scrutiny, the valuation collapsed to below $10 billion in weeks. Not because anything changed at the company, because the number finally met a market. The pattern repeats. OpenAI's revenue in 2024 reached approximately $3.4 billion annually. That sounds like a thriving business. Except the company lost approximately $5 billion in the same year to generate $3.4 billion in revenue. OpenAI spent somewhere between $8 and $9 billion. Each dollar of revenue cost roughly $2.50 to produce. This is not a growth phase inefficiency. This is a structural cost reality baked into the physics of the product. Training a frontier AI model, a single training run at the scale required to remain competitive, cost an estimated $100 million in 2023. By the time of the GPT-4 release, estimates from researchers at Stanford and Carnegie Mellon placed the training costs between $50 and $100 million per run. The next generation of models will cost more, not incrementally more, geometrically more. Each doubling of model capability requires roughly an order of magnitude increase in compute. That is not a projection, that is the empirical relationship that is held across every major scaling experiment conducted by every major lab. The hardware costs are not theoretical. A single H100 GPU, the chip that powers most frontier AI training, costs between $25,000 and $40,000 at list price, assuming you can obtain allocation. OpenAI reportedly operates clusters of tens of thousands of these chips simultaneously. The energy cost of running a single large language model inference cluster at commercial scale draws power in the range of tens to hundreds of megawatts continuously. Goldman Sachs published research in 2024 estimating that AI data centers would consume 8% of total United States electricity by 2030, up from 2% in 2022. And then there is the water. A 2023 study published by researchers at the University of California, Riverside, and the University of Texas, Arlington, published in the journal Nature, estimated that ChatGPT consumes approximately 500 milliliters of fresh water per 20 to 50 queries for cooling data center infrastructure. That is a standard plastic water bottle for roughly every 10 questions asked, multiplied across 100 million daily users every day. The environmental cost of this technology is not a footnote. It is a structural operating expense that does not appear on the income statement, but will eventually appear in regulatory compliance costs and public opposition to data center siting. The trap is elegant in its completeness. To remain competitive, OpenAI must train larger models. Larger models cost more cost requires more revenue requires more customers require better products. Better products require larger models. There is no point in this loop where the economics improve. The loop only tightens. You can learn a lot about a company from who chooses to walk away. Ilya Sutskever co-founded OpenAI. He was its chief scientist. He was one of the most cited AI researchers alive, the intellectual architecture behind some of the most important advances in deep learning over the past decade. He voted to fire Sam Altman in November 2023. Then, after Altman was reinstated, Sutskever remained for a time. He quietly reduced his public presence. In May 2024, he announced his departure from OpenAI entirely, stating that he was leaving to pursue his own personal project. He subsequently founded Safe Superintelligence Inc., a company whose stated purpose is building safe AI with no commercial product pressure. His co-founder was Daniel Gross. His other co-founder was Ilya's close colleague Daniel Kokotajlo, who had already left OpenAI earlier in 2024, forfeiting his unvested equity, a sum reportedly in the range of millions of dollars, rather than sign what he described as a non-disparagement agreement that would prevent him from speaking about safety concerns. Kokotajlo did not sign. He walked away from the money. The people who built this walked away. Don't look away, subscribe. John Schulman, one of OpenAI's co-founders and the lead architect of the reinforcement learning from human feedback methodology that made ChatGPT possible, left in August 2024. He went to Anthropic, not to start his own company, not to retire, to join the primary safety-focused competitor. His stated reason in a post on social media was that he wanted to focus more on AI safety and alignment research. Paul Christiano, a former OpenAI alignment researcher, had already departed years earlier and founded the Alignment Research Center independently. The incorporation documents from OpenAI's founding in 2015, bearing signatures including Altman's, Sutskever's, and others, explicitly designated OpenAI as a non-profit organization whose purpose was the responsible development and maintenance of advanced AI for the long-term benefit of humanity. Those words were not marketing language. They were the legal founding purpose. The capped profit structure introduced in 2019 was intended to allow investment while theoretically maintaining mission primacy. The conversion process to a fully for-profit public benefit corporation, announced in 2024, required renegotiating those foundational documents. It required restructuring the relationship between the nonprofit entity and the commercial entity in ways that legal scholars at the University of California and Stanford describe publicly as legally unprecedented and structurally opaque. There is a consistent thread running through all of this. Not incompetence, not idealism failing to survive contact with capitalism. The actual pattern is a systematic and documented gap between the stated mission and the structural decisions. A gap that widened at every inflection point where mission and commercial scale came into conflict. Every time that conflict arose, the commercial scale won. Every single time. And the people who objected most clearly were the ones who built the technology in the first place. There's a term used in institutional investing called durable competitive moat. It refers to the structural advantages that allow a company to defend its market position against well-funded competition over time, not a head start. Not brand recognition, structural advantages that are difficult or impossible to replicate. To understand what comes next for OpenAI, you need to understand why the moat question is the only question that matters, and why it is the one question the current valuation does not answer. Consider Microsoft in the 1990s. Its durable moat had three components. First, proprietary software embedded so deeply in enterprise workflows that switching costs were prohibitive. Not just expensive, but practically disruptive. Second, a developer ecosystem of hundreds of thousands of third-party applications that only ran on Windows, creating a self-reinforcing network effect. Third, an OEM licensing structure that made Windows the default operating system on virtually every personal computer sold in the world, giving Microsoft distribution that no competitor could purchase at any price. Three interlocking structural advantages, each of which reinforced the others. OpenAI has none of these. Its models are not embedded in workflows in ways that create switching costs. Every major enterprise customer using OpenAI's API can route traffic to Anthropic, to Google, to Mistral, or to an open source model running on their own infrastructure by changing a single line of code. One line, the developer ecosystem built on OpenAI's models, is not exclusive. The same developers build on multiple models simultaneously. And distribution, Microsoft, OpenAI's largest partner and investor, launched Copilot with OpenAI's models, and simultaneously invested in building its own in-house model research capacity. The largest distributor is also the most capable potential replacement. What OpenAI has instead of a moat is brand recognition and a temporary capability lead. Brand recognition is not a moat. It is a head start with an expiration date. And the capability lead is measurable in months, not years, in a field where every major technology company on Earth is spending billions to close the gap. The revenue target required to justify a $300 billion valuation at even a generous revenue multiple of 20x is $15 billion annually. OpenAI's current trajectory, assuming aggressive growth, reaches that number sometime between 2026 and 2027, except the losses scale with revenue. At current unit economics, $15 billion in revenue means $12 to $15 billion in losses. The cumulative cash requirement to reach profitability, if profitability is even achievable at frontier scale, requires ongoing capital infusions of a magnitude that no private market has ever sustained for an extended period outside of sovereign wealth contexts. The legal exposure compounds this. The New York Times filed suit against OpenAI and Microsoft in December 2023, alleging copyright infringement at an industrial scale, with damages potentially in the billions. The Authors Guild has filed. Multiple class action suits from individual creators are proceeding through discovery. The litigation calendar alone represents a multi-year distraction and expense. The regulatory environment is tightening in the European Union, where the AI Act imposes compliance costs and operational restrictions on high-risk systems. In the United States, the FTC has opened investigations into the competitive practices of multiple AI companies. There is no near-term legal horizon that is clear. Sam Altman told The Atlantic in 2023, "I think the thing that I believe, and that I think we've gotten right, is that this is going to be one of the most transformative technologies in human history. And I think OpenAI is the best position to get it right." His own words, "Against a structure that concentrates decision-making authority in ways the founders explicitly designed the original nonprofit to prevent. Against a governance record that produced a board revolt from the people who knew the technology best. Against a cost structure that requires perpetual capital to sustain, and a competitive position that requires no switching costs to abandon." So where does this actually end? The most likely outcome is not a collapse, not a scandal, not a moment of reckoning that the world watches in real time. It is something quieter, and in some ways, more sobering. The most probable trajectory is managed absorption. Microsoft already owns the distribution. Microsoft already has the enterprise relationships. Microsoft already has the infrastructure. The conversion to a for-profit structure, currently in negotiation, makes the entity acquirable in ways the capped profit nonprofit never was. The board revolt of 2023 was not a failed coup. It was a preview of the governance tension that a fully commercial structure will resolve, permanently in favor of the capital. Altman will likely preside over an OpenAI that is, structurally, a division of the infrastructure it depends on, branded independently for as long as the brand has value, and consolidated quietly when the brand no longer commands a premium. Someone has to keep watching. That's why this channel exists. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. The people who built the most powerful artificial intelligence system in human history designed it specifically to be governed by a mission. Watch that mission be subordinated to capital at every critical juncture, tried to stop it once from the inside, and then left. And the world called the board reckless, called the departure of its best minds a talent reshuffling, and called the most consequential corporate governance failure of the AI era a victory.